FinCrime Unfiltered is proudly supported by Hummingbird. Hummingbird is a modern compliance platform designed to make financial crime investigations smarter, faster, and more effective. Because today's financial criminals are sophisticated, savvy, and agile, meaning the tools used to fight them should be too. Learn more at hummingbird.co. Hi, and welcome to FinCrime Unfiltered. I'm Sarah Beth Felix. So we have breaking news coming out of FinCEN. I actually recorded a show earlier today, and at the end of that show, I saw FinCEN had an alert that was published. And I think part of what I talked about in my show that'll come up right after this definitely deals with some of the national priorities that seem to be the focus for FinCEN. Again, they have it in this alert, but I wanted to at least take a few minutes before you see the rest of episode 2 to talk about something that just was released on May 1st by FinCEN. This is regarding oil smuggling schemes in the U.S. Along the southwest border, and it's associated, of course, with Mexican-based cartel activity. So I thought it was interesting to see the types of federal law enforcement agencies that were associated with this alert. We have, of course, FinCEN, of course, OFAC, but we also have the DEA, the Bureau, and HSI. So the key word to this is FIN-2025-oil smuggling. And I would say, a heads up, I have lived in Texas multiple times as an adult. I have worked all over the state, working with lots of banks, small community banks, important community banks, bigger banks in Texas. I will say this alert, please don't write it off as I'm sure we don't have anything associated with this. You need to look through this alert. I will have more details, more operational things to think about on my LinkedIn post. But at least for a few minutes, I would encourage you to read through this. Of course, I will have the highlighted version, so you don't have to read the whole thing if you're short on time. But I think just a few things that we can talk about before we get to the full episode 2 is that this is a multi-billion dollar scheme that is happening, and it involves complicit U.S. Smaller oil and natural gas companies. So they do have a list of red flags, which I think are pretty interesting. Almost every transactional red flag that they have involves the country of Mexico in terms of wire payments. But I think based off of other notices that we've seen, don't get hung up if a wire is not going directly to Mexico, but the end payment instructions have a Mexican-related business. So we know other notices have said it's not just Mexico, it's other countries in Central America that also are tied to these Mexican cartels. So I wouldn't totally just focus just on Mexico like some of the red flags, but look at some of the other countries that are also related. FinCEN outlines in this their national priorities. Again, I love to see it. They talk about the DTOs, they talked about the TCOs, and corruption. So that's 3 of the national priorities, again, that they're highlighting in this alert. I think where all banks should start, 100%, go look at your NAICS codes, your North American Industry Classification System codes, your industry codes that say we have code, I don't know what it is off the top of my head. I think it starts with a 4 that has to do with the oil and gas, the crude oil. I think it is important to understand how the money and the payments flow, which you can see in the graphic that is provided by FinCEN. But while we don't necessarily have to understand all the nitty gritty about what makes something crude oil and what makes something refined and all that kind of stuff, they do make a delineation that there are companies that are in the business solely of handling hazardous waste from the production of oil and then the refinement of oil. And then there's those that deal in the selling of the refined oil. And then there's those that deal in the selling of the crude oil. And so I think it is important because each of those actually have at least one, if not several, industry classification codes. I think it is important. That would be step 1. If I was sitting here going, how do I operationalize this in a bank? I would start there. Start at your NAICS codes and see what your exposure is, especially if you are in Oklahoma, Texas, in that area along the border. Definitely be starting there at the industries. Some of the red flags, again, like I said, a lot of them have to do with a wire to or wire from the country of Mexico. But I think there are also things in there that you can't program. And that would be something that I talk a lot about, which is the reasonableness level. Is this reasonable? And I think it's the third red flag that I read. Um, it talked about a smaller US based oil and natural gas company selling millions of dollars of crude oil, yet they have no online web presence. And I know if you've sat through one of my trainings, you're going to know that what I'm going to say is on repeat. If you don't have an online web presence or super basic site that looks like you are not a sophisticated company, then how do people find you? Like, if you well, one, if you don't have a web presence, how do people find you so then you can make the revenue that you're running through a bank? That to me is that reasonableness level. I think we all know that it's very frustrating when a company doesn't have some type of way of getting a hold of them, especially if there's no website. So if there's no website and it's a small U.S. Oil or gas company and they have millions of dollars in revenue, that should be a red flag. Now, does that mean that they're specifically associated with this alert? Maybe not, but I think it's the first step in kind of trying to figure out what is your threat exposure in this. A couple other things to definitely pay attention to. This is not just for traditional financial institutions. They made it very clear that there's also securities and investments components to this. There's an MSB component to this. So just because you're an MSB does not mean that you don't have to operationalize this. So I would definitely recommend that you start looking at the industry codes. And if you aren't collecting industry codes for the businesses that you're sending remittances for, I would encourage you to start that today. The other thing before I close, 314B, I love that they talk about the importance of 314B in this alert. I said this yesterday. I spoke at a conference for FIRMA, which is Fiduciary Investment Risk Management. And I've said it a lot. 314B to me is peeking through to see whether or not something is reasonable, to see whether or not something is justified. Those institutions that firmly choose not to register for 314B, to me, they are saying, I don't want to know what's on the other end of this, so I don't have to work the alert, or I don't have to perform the investigation, or I don't have to write the SAR. I know that's probably going to ruffle some feathers, but page 9 of this alert talks about the importance of 314B and operationalizing not just this alert, but other alerts that we expect to get from FinCEN. So with that, I will stop there. I could go on for a long time. It's a 13-page alert. I will have more details and more things to do on my LinkedIn, but I at least wanted to talk about this since it came out right after I recorded our second episode. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll now pass you over to the full second episode. Thanks. Hello, and welcome to the second episode of FinCrime Unfiltered. I'm Sarah Beth Felix. So, since we're just starting out this podcast, I wanted to insert at least a few times a month something I'm going to call FinCrime Watch. I don't love the name of it, but it helps me remember something funny. And since we deal with a lot of serious stuff, I thought I'd share with you where my mind went when I said FinCrime Watch. And I don't know if anybody's watched Anchorman, the lovely Ron Burgundy, and Veronica Corningstone. While I feel like I have lived part of Veronica Corningstone's life professionally, there is a segment on Anchorman where Brian Fantana is waiting for the panda to be born, and it's called Panda Watch. And if you remember that, that's basically what I'm going for, FinCrime Watch. Just without the, suits from the 70s. So with that, I wanted to just kind of go over a few things that have happened and some, of course, takeaways, hoping that it's not just me sitting here telling you what I think, but also some things that'll actually help you when you get back to the office, maybe think or look at things a little bit differently. So first up, I think this will kind of be in reverse in terms of things that happened most recently to things that have come out over the last week to 10 days. So yesterday, the OCC, Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, made a statement. The acting comptroller Hood, he talked about AI and other technologies, and how they have to be used ethically and responsibly within the banking industry. I don't think anyone takes issue with that. The OCC specifically has repeated that they place a huge emphasis on financial inclusion for underserved communities. And I would, again, think everyone's on the same page with that. We want everyone to have access to the US financial system that are within the bounds of the US, right? We're not trying to make it for everyone around the world to have access. We want underserved communities to have access to the US banking system. Again, no one has issues with that. But I think part of where the focus goes is making sure that there's not burdensome, but that there is some regulatory oversight. And so they do want to manage some of the potential risks. And then they went on to name some of those risks. And I wanted to maybe stir the pot a little bit, maybe get people thinking. So, of course, the first risk that they list is bias. The second one they list is security vulnerabilities. And the third one they list is fraud. So I've got questions when it comes to what bias looks like in AI. And I think bias needs to be defined because some of what I've heard called bias in the AI world, I see as contextual data. It helps you see the customer or the transaction in a clear manner. So, and please remember that bias can be for or against something. So when advisories come out and they focus, right, when advisories from FinCEN specifically, they come out and they focus on countries related to ID or passport or nationality, and the AML team is going to operationalize that. Is it bias or is it contextual data? Are we biased against every customer with a passport from that country that was listed in the advisory? No, of course not. Are we biased for every customer with a passport that's not from that listed country? No. Is it an important data element to operationalize some typologies to fight financial crime? Absolutely. And with golden passports being a thing, yes, both here in the US now and also overseas, I think it's important that we add contextual information so we don't have bias in favor of a person with a favorable country's passport. But then their cultural naming convention doesn't match the country of that passport. So, not that people from other parts of the world can't move to other countries. That's not the point. And I'm sure this is a whole other conversation, but I think it's important that we know that naming conventions, cultural naming conventions, factor into sanction screening programs. If you don't believe me, go read the 2019 Treasury Sanctions Framework document. They talk about making sure that your system is designed specifically to address cultural naming conventions. Okay, so beyond bias, and I feel like I could go on about that forever, but I at least wanted to get people thinking about when we talk about bias in AI, it can be in favor or against something. But when we talk about AI and financial crime, we have to make sure that we don't count something out that lending or some other area may consider a biased piece of data when it's an important contextual piece of data for us when we're trying to find financial crime, especially in light of the advisories that come out and they list certain countries and nationalities. Okay, so beyond bias, I believe AI really does have some payoffs in terms of microwaving large documents into operational takeaways, even though I feel like sometimes it's still missing the human element. It's looking for trends. It's not really operationalizing anything. And I was recently accused of using AI to produce my lessons learned that I do a lot on LinkedIn. And I will go on record saying I've never used AI. And you can tell that because my snarky, sometimes salty sassiness isn't something that comes naturally to the AI function. So I will say I've never used that. But it got me thinking, I wonder, after I've done the lessons learned, if I were to take the same document and put it into an AI engine and ask it to give me the lessons learned. And I will say they miss about 80% of what I extract as a human. So that's not to say I'm great. It's just to say that humans are so much better than what we think we can get from either machine learning or AI. So as it deals specifically with financial crime and the detection of fraud and suspicious activity, I firmly believe that it's not just about the responsible use of AI and security and all that kind of stuff. It really because AI is heavily influenced by historical or even current poor decision making, um, people who think the best of everyone, people who don't think like criminals, that are every day dispositioning suspicious activity alerts as not suspicious. Machine learning and AI are both learning. They are learning from those bad decisions. So for me, as I've said before, as I've said for years, AI is only as good as the humans that train it. And so if we think that AI is going to fix what ails us in the financial crime detection world, I think we have another thing coming. And I do want to point out one of my favorite people, Jim Richards, did make a comment that a lot of vendors, especially in the financial crime space, say they use AI, but they actually use machine learning. And I will say, yes, I have seen that. I am in a lot of different suspicious activity monitoring systems every month. And they do like to tell their customers that they're using AI. And I do agree with Jim that there is a lot more machine learning than AI. Now, there are some vendors that are using AI when it comes to suspicious activity monitoring detection. So I just wanted to give that caveat that machine learning or AI, they're close cousins, right? They aren't the same thing, but they are cousins. So part of my issue with the OCC taking a stand on this is that what I'm finding is that examiners, some examiners, not all, they really have a hard time measuring effectiveness when we're just using non AI financial crime detection tools. Because, and I don't think it's the examiner's fault because they have to be experts across the board on a whole bunch of things. I think it's because we've never taken the time to actually define what are indicators of an effective AML or financial crime detection system. And then now we're going to take something that examiners, some, are not really executing well, or at least executing consistently across different types of banks. And then we're going to layer AI, which is very complex. And then we want those examiners to be experts on what effective advanced technology looks like. And for me, I just feel like it's setting people up for failure. And, if we push out a few more years, we will find that when the AI kind of boom has died down a little bit, I don't think it's going to go away. If anyone was around in 2009, 10, 11, when big data, we thought big data was going to cure everything, everything that ails us in the AML world, and that certainly wasn't it. I feel like AI is kind of the same thing. I do believe it'll stick around a little bit longer, and it will probably have a little bit more of a better effect long term. But I think putting too much trust in an AI model when you don't know who's trained it when it comes to decision making, I would caution financial institutions, uh, if your financial crime detection system has said, don't worry about it, we have an AI system that our employees have trained, or we're going to combine it with what your team has done, but there's never been a deep quality control dive on how your analysts have dispositioned alerts over the years as suspicious or not suspicious. I would caution you in deploying that into an AI model going forward. The last thing you want are poorly trained AI models. So that's enough. I'm sure I'll talk about AI more as we start to see other regulatory agencies kind of get in the mix here. Thomson Reuters Risk and Fraud Solutions empower financial institutions to safely onboard and continuously evaluate customers, members, and vendors, and increase new business securely through automated technology. Visit tr.com/clear to learn more. Second news item, we have FINRA, and they are one of the securities regulators. And what I started to notice, and I actually made a post about this earlier this week, I did like a turtle race, and FINRA is way out in front because of the new administration, the shift, the kind of like pulling back and the enforcement of some things. We have seen zero consent orders in the AML or a financial crime space from every single federal banking regulator, to include the SEC. Big goose eggs everywhere. FINRA is the only one that actually has been continuing on with their enforcement of the Bank Secrecy Act as applicable and other FINRA regulations. And they have 13, I believe, as of this week. I have not checked today, but at least as of this week, they had 13. That's a heck of a lot more than we saw from them, at least in the last year. We saw other regulators having those kind of numbers, but certainly not FINRA. So the other thing I thought that was interesting that I did not post about was that uh, OFAC has since this current administration took office. OFAC has issued 0 enforcement penalties. And I did go back and all the way to the beginning of 2022, and this is the longest gap between the last enforcement penalty that was issued January 17th of this year, and we're still waiting for one. So that's 3.5 months, almost 4 months, soon to be 4 months, where we've had 0 OFAC enforcement penalties, which I do find interesting because, as I said last time in the first episode, FTOs and SDGTs are the focus. According to the DOJ, they want to root out all the FTOs and all the SDGTs from the US. We know that there are unknown parties within the FTOs and SDGTs, right? But for the known parties that they've named and that they've listed, because they have updated the OFAC list a couple times a week, that's pretty much the pace that they've been going. But we've seen no penalties. So either they haven't found those institutions that are involved in the facilitation of payments for, FTOs and SDGTs or other OFAC entities. But I do think it's interesting that that is kind of like the main focus of this administration, yet we've seen no penalties on that. So I would have thought we would have at least seen a few that would have come out since they took office. So just something to keep in mind. But so while FINRA is really only producing the only, I think, producing regulator for us to learn anything from, I wanted to at least extract some lessons that I think are applicable, regardless of whether or not you're a traditional bank, a credit union, a securities firm. There are things to learn from FINRA, and it's not under the threat, right? It's not like, oh, if you don't look at this, then your regulator is going to find it. That's not where I'm coming from. I'm coming from the side of constantly wanting to make sure that your program is refined, and that it's being updated as you learn more, as you see things differently. If it's a set it, forget it policies and procedures where every year you go in and you update, this or that little small sentence, but there's no real material change or direction, especially in your procedures, I would encourage you to try to think about things a little bit differently. So I will say most institutions, they rely on a third party, an affiliate, a downstream financial institution, a fintech, an MSB, some type of party like that to monitor and report red flags or activity to them. And when I saw this in the FINRA order, I felt validated because I've seen this before very recently as I'm reviewing the master services agreements, MSAs, where banks are safely relying on their third party, whether it's a fintech or an MSB or a securities firm or another affiliate, where they're saying, yes, of course we will monitor and we will report red flags to you. But there's been no oversight. There's no quality control function. There's no testing of that. It's like, yes, of course, they're going to send us the red flags because they are going to do their monitoring. And then we just kind of sit and wait for them to send the red flags. And then if they don't, nobody really goes and checks on it or cares about it unless an outside party like me asks, hey, how many red flags have you received from your downstream affiliate or party or customer? And then they go, oh, well, we haven't received anything. Okay, how long has it been like that? So just something to think about, because I think the majority of institutions have some type of downstream party that they safely rely on, even if it's in the contractual agreement. It may not be. I would double check to make sure it is in the MSA. But even if it is in the MSA, you still want to make sure that you have a quality control function that checks more than once a year, right? If you go a month, 6 weeks, or a quarter, and they've never referred a suspicious activity or referred a red flag to you, and they're churning through tens of millions of dollars of payments, you probably want to look at that. You definitely want to look at that just to make sure. And it doesn't have to be some like super formal process, right? You can just say, hey, can you send me any of your no SAR filed, right? To me, a SAR filed is just as good as a strong no SAR filed. So even if you reach out to that downstream party and you say, hey, I know y'all haven't sent us any SARs that you want us to follow or file, but have you done any no SAR filed? And they go, yeah, we have about 15 of them. Great. Can you send me those no SAR filed? And to me, that's just as good because it's showing that that function is still happening. Now, you might find some decisions in there that you would probably make differently, and that's probably a good thing. But I think it's definitely important that you have some type of quality control process that goes beyond a checkbox. And to me, that's how you do it. You ask them on a regular basis. Can you send me your no SAR files? Can you send me your SAR files? Can you send me the alerts that were escalated to a case that y'all decided were not SAR worthy? I think that's the way that you start to carry out an effective quality control process. The second thing FINRA also brought up, and I think it again is applicable to traditional financial institutions, omnibus accounts. I know they got a black eye recently, well, over the last 2+ years, because a lot of fintechs, there were a lot of issues. We saw it all in the news. Money gets jumbled up, ownership gets jumbled up in these omnibus accounts. Beyond the use of fintechs, it is quite frequent to see other non-bank financial institutions use omnibus accounts, specifically investment firms, specifically domestic foreign correspondent accounts. They all usually have an omnibus account. And sometimes we see nested omnibus accounts, like FINRA's order this week, where we had a securities firm that offered an omnibus account to foreign financial institutions. Well, that securities firm banks with another bank. So their bank partner should have known that this securities firm offered an omnibus account to a downstream foreign FI. Now, I can't say whether or not they did, but if you are either that securities firm in that process, that downstream foreign financial institution, or that upstream ultimate clearing bank partner with the omnibus account for the investment firm, there's a there's a big difference between KYCC, know your customer's customer, and that would be an omnibus account with a foreign financial institution that banks directly with a bank, right? So that's their they are the respondent. And then their customers, right? So this top line bank, this upstream bank has to know their customer's customer. But then when you add another layer into it, you add in a securities firm and a whole bunch of other things, you can really get into a jumbled up mess because now you're KYCC, that's triple C's, know your customer's customer's customer. That's a lot. And that's a lot of risk that is rolled up to the upstream bank. So I would just make sure that if you do have omnibus accounts, I do know community banks actually use these for their larger local investment securities firms. Make sure that you really, from an AML perspective, know exactly what's going in and out of that account and on whose behalf investments are being made, financed, money withdrawn. The third one would be procedures. And I know nobody likes to talk about procedures. It is not fun. It is certainly not the sexy part of our job. But I I think it is good because procedures aren't formal, right? They don't have to go to a board. I want to make sure that people's procedures go beyond the multi-generational layer upon layer. Unless you are still in the same institution that you were at in October of 2003 and then in January of 20 or I'm sorry, in January of 2005 when the first iteration of the exam manual came out. Unless you're in that same institution, in that same AML function, you most likely inherited a procedural document. And I think yes, our procedures must be tailored. We hear that all the time. We read it, we see it. But I just want to make sure that you remember that your red flags, whether it's policies or procedures, need to be your red flags. If you are a securities firm and you don't deal in low price securities, you are in mergers and acquisition, you're that type of investment company, then you shouldn't have red flags for low price securities. And vice versa. If you're a bank, right? If you're a traditional bank and you have a whole page of red flags for the securities and investment industry, not applicable. Now, while procedures are fine and we can update that, one of the things that procedures should do is they should inform your training, but it goes beyond training at that point. Your procedures really should outline the threats that are particular, and they should show up in the red flag. So don't just copy paste from appendix whatever in the FFIEC exam manual. Go beyond that. Think like a criminal. If you were going to rewrite your procedures, how would I use my firm, products, services, payment rails to move, conceal, store money? That's how you have to think. And that should be in your procedures. Then it should also inform your training. And then ultimately, it should inform how you approach the detection of suspicious activity. So procedures to me is not just a standalone document. When I read procedures and I see all these red flags that are completely not applicable to the institution that I'm working with, and then I go to their suspicious activity monitoring system, I go, oh yeah, and then that's not tailored too. Then I go to their training, I'm like, oh, then that training's not tailored either. To me, they're very much related. So I would just encourage you, start with your procedures because they're not formal, meaning they don't have to be board approved. Start with those procedures. Burn it down if you need to. Just start from a blank page or use AI. Go to ChatGPT and say, "Hey, how would an illicit actor move money through," and then name your payment product, name, don't name it, but put in a description of your payment product, put in a description of a product or service, and see how ChatGPT or Grok, use whatever AI tool to see if it helps you try to flesh out your procedures in a way that's customized for the threats of your institution. Um, Very quickly, and I thought this went without saying, but I guess not, because this has actually happened several times, not just with FINRA, but also with other regulatory agencies that we saw earlier this year before the turn of the administration and also end of last year. If your regulatory agency posts notices, guidances, advisories, please do something with it. Don't just look at the email and go, "Oh yeah," and then move on. And I did post this, and I heard from several of my friends that are brilliant lawyers. I said in my LinkedIn, "Take it as law." And then of course I put right after that, before my brilliant attorney friends come after me for saying this, because I'm not an attorney. I'm not saying it is enforceable by law. I'm saying your regulator is giving you a heads up. They are telling your firm, this is what we expect you to operationalize. If you haven't done anything with it, especially from these FinCEN advisories, I would encourage you to do so. Now, does that mean you have to go in and operationalize every red flag? No, but I've posted several starter steps that you can do, and it can be a memo to file. It doesn't have to be some formal process, especially if you have a flexible, configurable system, which I would encourage you. If you don't have an AML system where you can go in and in a sandbox environment run criteria that come out in this, that comes out in these advisories and notices, I would encourage you to start looking at what it would take to get a system that does give you the tools to really go through your data to operationalize these types of advisories that are coming out. So I definitely think it needs to be a board update. You need to talk about if you're missing any technology, like I just talked about, or people gaps. Definitely needs to be in your risk assessment. And like I said earlier, put it in a memo to file. Hey, this advisory from FinCEN came out. We were able to operationalize 4 of the 10 red flags. And this is what we came up with, right? It's not applicable to our institution because of XYZ. Or this one red flag is applicable. We have started investigation, et cetera, et cetera. So I would definitely encourage you to do that. So the last news item, I'm trying to keep this, as close to 30 minutes as I can. So our last news item, I guess, really is more of a lack of news. So with the lack of consent orders, it's really important to not get complacent. And I do deal with a lot of boards. I deal with a lot of bank executives, fintech executives. And I will say I'm starting to see a little bit of comfortability that's kind of creeping in. And just because this current administration has shifted in terms of enforcement from federal banking agencies, that doesn't mean that your institution, whether you're a traditional bank or credit union or an MSB or a fintech, it does not mean that your institution is magically cured from actual dirty money and illicit actors being involved in your day to day. And I think it's real important to remember that our goal isn't just not getting criticized from regulators. Our goal is actually making our community safer, finding that dirty money and reporting it in a highly effective, timely manner to our federal law enforcement partners, full stop. So, while this current administration is still squarely focused on national security, and I hope operationally we start to get more information about what that looks like, your financial institution can still be held accountable for facilitating payments for those FTOs and those SDGTs. And I think that's something to remember. Also, this current administration will only be in office for a few years. And possibly the next shift in the House can actually bring back to the top some enforcement of current AML requirements. The other thing to remember, the national priorities, those have not gone away. I have not heard any rumors about the national priorities being stripped out. I don't know, maybe I don't know the right people. I feel like I know the right people, but I do see that FinCEN is continuously adding this to their advisories. And to me, that means, like I said the last episode, it means don't lose focus on these national priorities. And I really hope that we get more direction. So I don't want to have to say that every episode, but I feel like we have to hear the same thing over and over and over for something to actually happen. So don't lose sight of the national priorities. Definitely don't get comfortable with this current shift in administration and what is important to them. I really hope that's enough operational to-dos in the 30 minutes. So don't be afraid to pause and note things down. I will say next episode, I've waited long enough. I have to cover unregulated and partially regulated industries and the impact on national security and your everyday AML life. So we know that federal law enforcement agencies, HSI, IRS, Criminal Investigative Services, and other sister agencies have been bringing interesting indictments against unregistered MSB, professional money laundering organizations, underpinning what I've been I've talked about for a long time, unregulated payment processors. We have hundreds of millions of dollars wrapped up in these indictments. And while I would love to talk for 6 hours on that, the next episode I'm going to be diving into what it means to you, because I do talk about it a lot, but what does that mean to you when you're trying to carry out an effective AML function? So that's what I hope to cover in the next one. Thank you for tuning in again, and would love to hear from you. We have an email address listed on each of the platforms. Please feel free to leave comments and send a note if you want me to cover something. Would love to hear from you. Thanks.